Don Knotts made America laugh for decades, but behind that nervous grin was a life far messier than Mayberry ever showed. To millions, he was Barney Fife, the shaky little deputy who could turn one bullet, one panic, and one wild stare into comedy gold. But off camera, Don carried fear, heartbreak, failed marriages, lonely years, and secrets he rarely let the world see. He loved hard, chased fame harder, and hid real pain behind one of TV's most unforgettable smiles. The women in his life saw the man behind the act. Some healed him, some hurt him, and one may have stayed in his heart until the end. From Mayberry fame to broken love stories, join us as we uncover the real man behind the comedy. Don Knotts' unexpected beginning. Jesse Donald Knotts was born on July 21, 1924, in Morgantown, West Virginia. He was the youngest of 4 sons born to William Jesse Knotts and Elsie Luzetta Knotts, whose maiden name was Moore. His brothers were Willis, William, and Ralph, who was called Sid. Don arrived very late in the family. His mother was 40 years old, and his closest older sibling was already 14 years ahead of him. His English ancestors on his father's side had come to America in the 1600s and settled in Maryland. But by the time Don was born, there was nothing grand about his daily life. His parents had given up their farm just 1 month before he came along. Money was tight. Space was tight. Hope was not easy to find. Later, author Daniel DeVise wrote about how painful Don's childhood really was. Don slept on a cot in the kitchen, while others shared rooms with boarders. His mother later ran a boarding house in Morgantown, which helped the family survive, but it also meant the home was never fully quiet or private. Before Barney Fife, before Mayberry, before the Emmys, Don was a small boy, trying not to take up too much room. He once looked back and said, "I did not come into the world with a great deal of promise." That line hurts because it sounds like something he learned early. He was pale, thin, often sick, and surrounded by grown-up problems. His life started far from the warm town fans later loved on television, but poverty was only one part of the pain. The deeper fear was waiting for him at home. That beginning matters because it explains why love, approval, and safety would later mean so much to him. Don did not come from comfort. He came from noise, illness, and rooms where a child had to be careful. And in a place like that, laughter became his first way out. Home was his first nightmare. Don's father, William, was a deeply troubled man. He suffered from schizophrenia, fought alcoholism, and was mostly bedridden by the time Don was born. Some reports also mention hysterical blindness. For a child, that kind of home could feel like a trap. Don had to pass through the living room to get from his kitchen bed to the rest of the house, and his father was often there. Sometimes Don could slip by quietly. Other times, the moment turned frightening. His father reportedly threatened him with a knife, and that kind of fear can follow a person for life. Don turned inward very young. His connection with his brothers was not simple either. They were much older, and some drank too heavily, just like their father. His daughter Karen later said his brothers tormented him too. Still, Don saw humor in them, especially in Sid. Sid could make the family laugh when there was almost nothing to laugh about. That mattered to Don. In a dark house, a funny person can feel like a lamp in the corner. Then, tragedy hit again. Don was still young when his brother William, known as Shadow, died after a terrible asthma attack. His father died of pneumonia when Don was 13. Karen later said that after his father died, a huge burden lifted, and Don became old enough to get another brother under control. But the marks were already there. His mother, Elsie, carried the family forward and lived until 1969, when she died at 84. She was later buried in the family plot in Morgantown, along with Don's relatives. By then, Don was famous, but those early rooms had already shaped him. He had learned that danger could come from people who were supposed to protect you. He had also learned that laughter could give a frightened child a way to breathe. That is why his later sweetness never felt simple. He had seen anger up close, then spent his life making people feel safe enough to laugh. The fake friend who made him real. Before Don had a real audience, he had imaginary friends. He used them to escape the fear around him. He would act out happy little dramas in his head, as if he could create the life he did not have. That tells you something important about him. Comedy was not just a talent. It was a safe place. As a boy, he became fascinated by ventriloquism after hearing Edgar Bergen on the radio. Karen later said her father saw it as a way to get out of his poor surroundings and into show business. He even sent away every penny he could find for a cheap device from a magazine that promised to teach him how to throw his voice. The device was a fraud, but the booklet helped him practice. He studied it carefully and learned how to move his tongue and mouth. Soon, he was making his mother laugh with voices that seemed to come from apple pies and laundry. Then came Danny, his ventriloquist dummy. Danny became his partner, his escape, and maybe the first friend who could never leave unless Don wanted him to. Don performed at churches and school events before high school, and people started to notice him. As he got older, things improved in public. In high school, classmates liked him. They voted him class president, and he even had a yearbook column. But being liked did not fix what he felt inside. In 1976, Don told the Los Angeles Times, "I felt like a loser." He was unhappy most of the time, hated being poor, and hated his small size. That is the sad trick in Don's story. Other people were already laughing, but the boy making them laugh still felt like he did not belong. The strange part is that pain did not make him cold. It made him watch people closely. He studied fear, pride, embarrassment, and small human mistakes before he knew those things would become his comedy. He was already learning how to turn weakness into timing, and that skill would soon carry him far beyond Morgantown. One audition nearly ended everything. By the time Don graduated from Morgantown High School, he was known for comedy. He believed he might have a real chance in New York City. So at just 18, he went to Manhattan and tried to break into entertainment. It should have been the start of something bright, but his first big step turned painful. His audition went badly. A casting director told him he should give up because there was no place for him in show business. For a young man who already felt small, that must have landed hard. Don went back to West Virginia with the dream bruised. At home, he took a job plucking chickens for a local grocery store. It was not the life he wanted. It was not the stage. It was not applause. It was just work, survival, and waiting. But the world soon changed. World War II arrived, and in 1943 Don joined the United States Army. Many people thought the military would never take him because he looked thin and underfed. But they did, and they found the right place for him. He served from June 21, 1943 to January 6, 1946 in the 6817th Special Services Battalion. He reached the rank of Technician Grade 5, which was like corporal at the time. His role was not the kind some rumors later claimed. He was not a strict Marine drill instructor. Instead, he entertained troops with Stars and Gripes, a comedy group that traveled across the Western Pacific. His service brought honors, including the World War II Victory Medal, the Philippine Liberation Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, and the Army Good Conduct Medal. Don still used Danny in the act, But over time, he grew tired of the dummy, especially when Danny got more laughs than he did. Somewhere in the South Pacific, Don threw Danny overboard, almost like he was tossing away the boyhood act that had saved him. The scared boy from Morgantown had found courage on stage, but life was about to test his heart too. His first marriage started with a risk. After the Army, Don returned to West Virginia University. He earned a bachelor's degree in education with a minor in speech and graduated in 1948. He was also a member of Phi Sigma Kappa fraternity. On campus, he kept building himself as a performer. He had come home from war more sure of his craft, and his dream was still alive. This was also where love entered his life in a serious way. During his senior year, Don married Catherine Elaine Metz on December 27, 1947. Catherine was a classmate, and her father, Carl Metz, was a minister at the First Baptist Church in Wheeling, West Virginia. He married the couple in that church. Some accounts say Catherine was already engaged when she met Don, which makes their beginning even more interesting. She was well-raised, the daughter of a minister, and probably did not look like the obvious match for a wild, funny young performer. But Don had a way of pulling people toward him. He used his best material, kept her laughing, and won her over. Karen would later say there was something magnetic about her father, something that made women respond to him. Catherine was there before the big applause, before the fans, and before the famous face. That matters because she knew the young Don, the hopeful Don, and the Don who still had to prove himself every morning. After college, Don and Catherine headed to New York. He borrowed $100 and took his wife with him in 1949, hoping the city would finally open its doors. That was a brave move for a young couple. They had love, but love did not pay rent. Once again, casting directors rejected him. The dream that had looked possible in Morgantown became much harder in the big city. Catherine had married a man with talent, but she had also married a man chasing a life that would test both of them. Broadway gave him more than fame. Don's early New York years moved slowly. His first steps were small, but each one mattered. He did stand up in clubs, leaned on contacts from his Army days, and accepted whatever work came his way. He found radio work and played Windy Wales on Bobby Benson and the B-Bar B-Riders, a wisecracking character that helped him sharpen his timing. Then came television. From 1953 to 1955, he appeared on the soap opera Search for Tomorrow. In 1956, he reached a wider audience on Steve Allen's variety show. His most famous bit there was the nervous man in fake Man in the Street interviews. Don knew how to play fear because he understood it from the inside. He once explained where his nervous character came from. At a banquet in West Virginia, he saw a speaker shake, drop notes, spill water, and lose control. Don realized that many people understood that fear. As a small, slim man, he could turn that terror into comedy. He later said the idea became 2 full nightclub routines about nervous after-dinner speakers. By then, Don had found the shape of his gift. He was not selling power, he was selling panic. And somehow, that made people trust him more, because everyone knows what it feels like to be nervous. Around the same time, Broadway changed his future. From 1955 to 1957, he appeared with Andy Griffith in No Time for Sergeants, playing Corporal Manuel Dexterity and a preacher. In 1958, he made his movie debut in the film version with Andy, too, playing a high-strung Air Force test administrator whose routine gets wrecked by a new recruit. That friendship with Andy would become one of the most important bonds of his life. Don was often cast as the nervous sidekick, the man who made other men look stronger. But the same worried face that kept him from looking like a leading man was about to make him unforgettable. America laughed while his home struggled. In 1960, Don saw Andy Griffith's new show taking shape and made a bold little joke that changed his life. He told Andy that the show would need a deputy, and that deputy should be him. Andy helped make it happen. Don became Barney Fife on The Andy Griffith Show, and television history changed with him. At first, Andy was expected to be the funny lead, while Don played the straight man, much like their earlier work. But by the second episode, Andy knew the truth. Don should be funny, and Andy should play straight. Barney was self-important, romantic, nervous, and usually wrong. He dreamed of being brave, but his one shiny bullet stayed in his shirt pocket for a reason. Don played both the comic side and the sad side of Barney. Viewers laughed at him, but they also cared about him. The role brought Don 5 Emmy Awards for Best Supporting Actor in a television comedy. Don once said, "Any character an actor creates is an extension of some part of himself." Barney worked because he was not fake. He was Don's fear, pride, sweetness, and need to be respected, all squeezed into one deputy uniform. Yet success did not calm everything at home. Don and Catherine had welcomed daughter Karen on April 1, 1954, and son Thomas in February 1957. By the time Mayberry made him famous, the family lived in Glendale, which Karen later described as almost Mayberry-like in its smallness. Fans knew where they lived and came by asking for autographs. To Karen, life still felt loving and normal, but fame had a cost. Don worked long days, often 10 hours at a time. Reports say Catherine did not fit easily with the show's social circle. As Don grew busier and more famous, the distance inside the marriage grew. America saw a warm deputy in a friendly town, but inside Don's real home, another relationship was starting to slip out of reach. A funny man fought dark moods. Don and Catherine divorced in 1964, after 17 years of marriage and 2 children. Afterward, he raised Karen and Thomas on his own. Karen later made it clear that even though he was gone a lot for work, he checked in, came home, and made time when he could. She said she and her brother never felt neglected. She also said he was not Barney Fife at home. He was witty, funny, loving, not tough, but he did have high standards. Still, behind that fatherly side, Don carried heavy moods. Karen called him mercurial, meaning he had many different kinds of moods. He fought depression, hypochondria, chronic insomnia, and deep anxiety. Long before Mayberry, he could become so upset before a performance that he stayed in bed for hours or even days. Doctors gave him anti-anxiety medication in the 1950s, and he became dependent on the pills. Don once spoke about acting in the Tampa Bay Times in 1964 and said, "When you are being someone else, you have less inhibition. This character frees you from personal anxiety or personal inhibition." That line explains a lot. On stage, he could hide inside someone else and feel less afraid. Off stage, the fear came back. His daughter later said she sometimes tried to lift him out of a downward spiral by pointing out the positives. She was only a child, but she could see the sadness. Karen later said, "Comedy felt like a drug for people like her father because laughter could lift him out of sadness. When an audience laughed, that good feeling became stronger." At the same time, Don had charm that pulled women close. Karen told People in 2006, "Dad was kind of wild." In a later interview, she said women were very drawn to him, and when relationships ended, they often stayed friendly. That restless side would soon pull him away from the safest role he had ever known. His biggest role became his biggest risk. Don won 5 Emmys for Barney Fife, but he left The Andy Griffith Show in 1965. For years, fans wondered why he walked away from the role that made him a legend. The answer was bittersweet. Don believed the show would end after 5 seasons because Andy had talked about stopping there. So Don began looking ahead and signed a 5-film deal with Universal Studios. Then Andy changed his mind and continued the show. Don later admitted that if he had known Andy would go on, he would have stayed. Instead, Barney was written off as moving to the Raleigh police force, and Don returned only for guest appearances. He also appeared on Mayberry RFD as best man when Andy Taylor married Helen Crump. But full-time Mayberry was over for him. The painful part was that leaving Mayberry gave Don freedom, but it also took away the safest place his talent had ever found. He wanted more, yet the world mostly wanted Barney back. Don hoped movies would make him a leading man. He had already appeared in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World and The Incredible Mr. Limpet. His Universal films included The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, The Reluctant Astronaut, The Shakiest Gun in the West, The Love God, and How to Frame a Fig. The Love God was his bold attempt to play a very different kind of bachelor. It was racy, strange, and far from Barney. Some critics liked it, but audiences did not accept him that way, and many theaters did not even show it. In 1970, the Don Knotts Show arrived with big hopes and ended quickly. He later said there was huge competition because everybody had a variety show. His son Thomas later remembered that year as one of the hardest times he ever saw his father work. Don was still working, but the dream of being seen as a classic movie star kept slipping away. Laura Lee entered during a new chapter. Even after career disappointments, Don kept moving. In the 1970s, he stayed busy with guest spots, stage work, ads, and family-friendly films. He voiced animated versions of himself in the new Scooby-Doo movies and worked with Tim Conway in films like The Apple Dumpling Gang, The Apple Dumpling Gang Rides Again, The Prize Fighter, and The Private Eyes. He also appeared in Disney films like Gus, No Deposit, No Return, Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo, and Hot Lead and Cold Feet. In his personal life, he found love again with Laura Lee Chukna. They married in 1974. Much of their relationship stayed private, which makes her one of the quieter women in his story. Publicly, we know they were married until 1983. Laura Lee later married Dr. Howard Murad, and public details described her as a University of Southern California graduate and an accomplished dancer. During her years with Don, his career found new life. In 1979, he joined Three's Company as Ralph Furley, the strange but lovable landlord. The show was already a hit, and John Ritter later said the cast was scared of Don at first because of his star status. But Don fit in quickly. When Suzanne Summers left after a contract dispute, writers began giving some of the material meant for Chrissy to Furley. Suddenly, Don had a new hit and a new generation of fans. His daughter Karen later said some old Andy Griffith fans were bothered by Furley's campy style, while gay audiences adored him, and Don adored those fans back. Behind the scenes, Carol Summers, a Three's Company script supervisor, later became Don's agent and often went with him to personal appearances. That detail shows how busy this new chapter became. Don was not simply remembered from Mayberry. He was still being booked, watched, and recognized by people who had grown up with a completely different version of him on television. For Don, the old sidekick had found another door back into living rooms again. But just as life seemed steady again, another fear arrived. At only 57, Don was diagnosed with macular degeneration. His sight became blurry. Reading, driving, and recognizing faces became difficult. The thought of losing vision shook him deeply, and that fear moved right into his marriage. Vulnerability pulled Francis toward him. Don's diagnosis took a heavy emotional toll. He once said he became depressed for a while, then reminded himself that a blind person might give anything to have the vision he still had. That thought helped, but the fear did not vanish. Laura Lee later suggested that the threat of blindness pushed him into a kind of bucket list state, and their marriage ended in 1983. Medical care later helped his eyesight, but his private life had changed again. He continued working through the 1980s and 1990s. In 1986, he returned to his most beloved role in Return to Mayberry. In 1987, he joined What a Country as Principal Bud McPherson. From 1988 to 1992, he reunited with Andy Griffith again on Matlock as Les Calhoun. His roles became more scattered, but he still appeared in films and shows, including Big Bully and Pleasantville. His hometown honored him too. In 1998, Morgantown renamed South University Avenue as Don Knotts Boulevard on Don Knotts Day, and he became an honorary deputy sheriff in Monongalia County. In 2000, he received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Around this later period, a woman from his past became important. Frances Yarborough, also called Francie, had worked on What a Country in 1987. She was hired mainly to help Don learn his lines. She was in her 20s, and he was entering his 60s. But Daniel Devizet wrote that they were kindred spirits. Francis later remembered, "My first reaction to him was that he was so vulnerable. I'd never met someone so vulnerable." Many women had liked Don's charm, but Francis seemed to notice the soft wound under the jokes. In 2002, they married, and she became his third and final wife. By then, Don had loved, lost, and started over more than once. No one outside his heart could truly know which woman meant the most. But Frances became the woman who stood beside him in his final chapter. Love stayed beside him at goodbye. By the early 2000s, Don was still working, but age and health were catching up with him. Macular degeneration in both eyes made live television appearances harder, and for a time, he became almost blind. Still, he kept going. He took voice roles, appeared in Scooby-Doo, Night of 100 Frights, worked on Cartoon Network promotions, reunited with Tim Conway for Hermie and Friends, and voiced Mayor Turkey Lurkey in Chicken Little in 2005. He also made one of his last live-action appearances on That 70s Show, playing a landlord. His final role was in Air Buddies, voicing a deputy dog named Sniffer. But another illness had already arrived. Doctors diagnosed Don with lung cancer in the early 2000s, even though he had quit smoking more than 10 years earlier. Don believed he could beat it. He went through chemotherapy, but he did not tell his children the full truth at first because he planned to survive and move on. After everything he had already survived, poverty, fear, rejection, anxiety, divorce, depression, career disappointments, and eyesight trouble, cancer may have felt like one more battle he could push through. Frances was beside him as his wife. Karen and Thomas were still close to him in their own ways. Karen had followed him into entertainment, while Thomas chose a quieter life as an electrical engineer. Don had also lost people he cared about, including his Three's Company co-star John Ritter, who died in 2003. By then, Don knew how quickly a familiar face could disappear. When Don's illness grew worse, Andy Griffith came back to his side. The two had fallen a bit out of touch, but the bond was still there. Don's condition worsened in 2006. Chemotherapy was no longer enough, and complications from the cancer became too serious. Even then, he kept making people laugh. Karen later said her father's funniness was completely, insanely natural, and that even as he was dying, He made her and her stepmother laugh so hard she had to leave the room. Later, she regretted not staying and laughing out loud. Francis later said, "He saw poignancy in people's pride and pain, and he turned it into something endearing and hilarious." Andy was one of the last people at Don's bedside. He told him he loved him and held his hand. Don died on February 24, 2006, at age 81, from pulmonary and respiratory complications of pneumonia related to lung cancer. Later, Morgantown honored him with a statue outside the Metropolitan Theater. The same place that once held his fear now honored him in bronze. And after a life like that, one question still remains. Which part of Don Knotts' private life surprised you most? The fear he carried, the love he kept searching for, or the pain he kept hidden behind the laughs? And do you think Francis was the piece he finally needed at the end? Or was Don's real love always the comedy that saved him? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.